Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the local review body for the 13th of May, 2024. As always, the first thing I do is introduce everybody on the top table. First of all, myself, I'm Councillor Bob Braun. I am convener of the local review body, and I have to my left today Bailey Mike Williamson, and to my right, Councillor Ken Harvey. We are, by requirement, all members of the planning committee, as is required to sit on this body. To my far right is Mrs. Leslie Tierney, who is an independent planning advisor. She has had no involvement with any of these cases until they started the appeal to the LRB. To my left, beyond Bailey Williamson, is Mr. Jeff Fogg, who is our legal advisor today, and beyond him, Mr. Danny Williams, who is Democratic Governance Officer. So the first thing on the agenda, members, is to ask for declarations of any interest. Bailey Williamson?
No, I have no declarations.
And Councillor Harvey?
No declarations of interest from me either.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting. And I believe it was just myself and Bailey Williamson. We were both on last time. Are you happy to agree with the minutes? Agree with the minutes. Okay. So, members, we'll now move on to the first of our applications for review today. That is item 4.1, which is the change of use of flat to form a short-term let accommodation unit in retrospect at 75 Muirton Place in Perth. Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce that for us.
Thank you, convener. We'll just run through the slides to start with. Next slide, please. So just a general overview here of the location of the appeal site, which is to the north side of Muirton Place. The yellow star there indicates the location of the property. You've got the town centre effectively to the south, and then you can see it's largely residential roundabout, golf course to the east there, and some retail to the west side. Next slide, please. And then this is just a slightly closer view into the appeal property on Muirton Place on the north side there. And as you can see, largely roofs of dwelling houses in the immediate vicinity. Next slide, please. This is the site plan for the application. So the red line there outlines the appeal site, the application site, which is round the property, the access, the pedestrian access from the main road, and then the communal and private garden area to the rear of the property. Next slide, please. And then this is the floor plan of the property, set of stairs that come up the outside of the building to the upper floor flat, living room and bedroom to the front, and another bedroom, bathroom and kitchen to the rear. Next slide, please. And then we've got some photographs here. So it's an upper floor flat in this traditional building. There's 4 flats in the block, one underneath the appeal site, and then the flat on the upper floor, same on the other side of the building. Next slide, please. And this is from the front, and you can now see the separate access to the upper floor flat to the side of the building on the left-hand side there. Next slide. And then this is that separate access to the side of the property that takes you directly up to the first floor flat. Next slide. And then this is as you come round to the back of the property, communal pedestrian access round to the rear. And then this is the rear of the property. So again, the ground floor flat there on the bottom and the application site on the top floor. Next slide, please. And then this is further back from the area of ground, which is the private garden ground that goes with the flat, and then another area of garden to the front there, which is in the ownership of the ground floor flat and some communal areas as well. Next slide. And then these are outbuildings and bin areas, etc. Next slide, please. And then this is looking back towards the top end of the garden. Next slide. Thank you. So just to introduce the information about the appeal, the site is at 75 Muirton Place in Perth, which is a 2-bedroom first floor flat in a block of 4, each with their own separate door. The building is on the north side of Muirton Place and the door to the property is on the west side of the building. The door on the ground floor flat is on the front elevation. There's a shared access path from the street to the shared and private garden areas at the rear. The surrounding area is established residential with a mix of flats and dwelling houses. The parking is on street. The Council's non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets was approved on the 1st of November 2023 and is a material consideration which was adopted prior to the determination of this application. The application was refused for the following reasons. 1, that the proposed retrospective change of use is contrary to Policy 30 Tourism E of the National Planning Framework 4, as the proposal will result in 1, an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and 2, the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And secondly, the proposal is contrary to MPF 4 Policy 14C, Design Quality in Place, and Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2 Policies 1A and 1B Placemaking, and Policy 17D Residential Areas, as the short-term let accommodation would adversely impact on the amenity of residents and the short-term let use is not compatible with the amenity and character of a long-established residential street. So in terms of the wider assessment by the Planning Service, it's noted that STLs can be supported if there is no unacceptable impact on local amenity or the character of a neighbourhood or areas, or the loss of residential accommodation is outweighed by demonstrable economic benefits. In terms of amenity, the use and movement of the property as an STL through the turnover of guests will have a detrimental impact on the amenity of existing residents and as associated adverse impact on the safety and perceived safety of those residents. The intensification of the short-term use would exacerbate the situation. The issue is also contrary to MPF 4 Policy 14 and LDP 2 Policies 1A and 1B and Policy 17 of the LDP due to the resulting change in character of the property in terms of a lack of permanent residents and potential for disturbance to neighbouring residents within the communal areas, including the access, waste storage areas and rear garden, and that decreases the safety and perception of safety. It is noted that the 6 letters of objection note the detrimental effect on amenity and the impact of this use in an established residential community, and one of those is from North Inch and Muirton Community Council. These issues are considered to be of sufficient weight to justify refusal of the application. In terms of MPF Policy 30E Tourism Clause 2, the proposal has resulted in the loss of residential accommodation in an established residential area north of the city centre, and this loss is not outweighed by demonstrable economic benefits. Although there is no in-curtilage parking associated with the flat and it is on-street parking on Muirton Place, the objections highlight a long-running issues with on-street parking, and that the STL use exacerbates this because it is considered that short-term let users will be less respectful to any parking concerns than permanent residents. Although this is recognised, there is no reason for refusal related to parking. In terms of the non-statutory guidance, this acknowledges that while short-term lets can bring economic benefits, this must be balanced against the impact of the loss of that residential property on the availability of housing for local people, and in particular access to affordable housing. The Council wishes to support a sustainable visitor economy and therefore recognises the importance of addressing the short-term let issue whilst also encouraging the development of appropriate located hotels, guest houses and bespoke self-catering units that do not erode local housing availability. The guidance outlines matters to be considered in the assessment, including whether the property is within a predominantly residential area and there could be adverse impact on amenity, particularly in blocks with shared and communal entry. However, the proposed use is incompatible with the neighbouring residential uses in a long-established residential area north of the city centre. The short-term let use and the movement of guests could erode residential amenity on a cumulative basis. In terms of the case made by the applicant, they have addressed the impact on the living space in Perth, as the refusal is based on a short-term let, reducing the availability of houses for families and any adverse impact on the amenity of residents. They note the broader housing context in Perth and that housing data shows a dynamic market with varying needs. While there is undoubtedly a demand for family housing, there is also an increasing need for diverse accommodation options. The conversion of one flat into a short-term rental is a small fraction of the housing stock. One short-term rental is unlikely to affect the living space for families. Moreover, embracing short-term rentals can contribute positively to the local economy. Similar conversions in the neighbouring areas have shown that such initiatives can coexist harmoniously with residential neighbourhoods without affecting living space. They are committed to implementing mitigation measures, including adhering to noise restrictions, safety standards, and community engagement initiatives. By working with the community, the issues that may arise can be addressed, ensuring responsible holiday rental management. There is a commitment to establishing regular channels of communication with the relevant authorities to guarantee that they meet or exceed all safety standards. The refusal should be reconsidered with an emphasis on the minimal impact of one conversion on the housing market and the potential economic benefits for the local community. In terms of other matters, environmental health has no objection and the property will be subject to licensing conditions. Communities housing strategies state that the postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets is below the level at which it may be considered appropriate to introduce a control area in order to help manage high concentrations of STLs, where it affects the availability of residential housing or the character of a neighbourhood. Transportation and Development has no objections. 6 representations were received objecting to the application, including from the Community Council, and these include removal of affordable housing from the area, negative impact on the amenity of neighbouring properties, negative impact on the wider residential neighbourhood, erosion of social fabric of the wider community, detrimental effect of existing on-street parking, noise, disruption and antisocial behaviour impacting the amenity of residents, unsettling behaviour of strangers on a residential street, negative impact on town centre hotels due to increase of short-term lets in residential areas, potential to set a precedent for more short-term lets, which would exacerbate the impact on residential amenity, and it's contrary to MPR 4 Policy 30. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll proceed to questions. Just a point, perhaps many of the photographs we have and the complaints obviously relate to parking. I'm assuming when you took the photographs, it was sometime during the day. There seems to be deserted cars everywhere, right?
Yes, convener. It was mid-morning probably when I took the photograph.
Bailey Williamson, any questions?
No questions.
And Councillor Harvey.
No questions from me either.
Okay, members. Can we then proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is, the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey Williamson.
Have sufficient information.
And Councillor Harvey.
I have sufficient information.
I too am happy to proceed. So on this occasion we will. The comment, residential amenity, has been brought forward on several occasions and is an important factor within reviewing short-term lets, as Mrs. Tierney mentioned, and it's mentioned in the report of handling. We've had a similar case like this nearby some months ago, where the property had its own separate entrance, but it did have 2 parking spaces within the curtilage, which was a substantial difference to this one. We have 6 objections before us that all seem to relate to parking, and residential amenity is obviously an important factor with all of this. Another factor which we have to take into account, of course, and it's mentioned in the report of handling, is the repeal to the DPEA on another property, not here in Perth, but nonetheless it's a material consideration. And on that basis, it clearly mentions that the movement of people in and out of a property can substantially change the residential characteristic of that property. Bearing that in mind, and the concerns that neighbours have for this one, and although it is similar, it has its own entrance, I appreciate, but given the problems with parking and residential amenity, I am to consider to dismiss the appeal. Bailey Williamson.
I agree. I believe the property is not in a commercial area, and it would bring commercial aspect to that street. So therefore, I dismiss the appeal.
And Councillor Hart.
Similarly, due to the fact that it's breaking the NPF4 and the impact on the local community, I would refuse the appeal.
Mr. Fogg, unanimous decision there to uphold the officer's decision. Okay.
Yes.
Fine, thank you. So then, members, will now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is number 4.2. This is an erection of a dwelling house land 20 metres southwest of 4. How do we pronounce that one? Sorry. Yeah, your local pronunciation is required here.
But convener, just to go back on the last one,
Yeah.
the reason for refusal mentions policy 1B. I think perhaps with other ones we've been removing that from.
You're quite right. 1B should be removed. It's not, doesn't really apply to it. It should be just policy 1A. Okay, Mr. Fogg?
Yep.
Pronunciation help? Yeah. Local pronunciation.
Legionen.
Legionen
Road.
and Grantley, I believe you pronounced that. Thank you very much in Aberfeldy. Mrs. Tierney, if you could lead us on this one, please.
Thank you, convener. We'll just go through the slides again to start with. Yes, so this is the application site, appeal site denoted with the yellow star. So as you can see, just on the outskirts of Grantley, there on the west side, towards Little Ballinluig. Next slide, please. And then as we zoom in there, obviously the main road A827 down to Aberfeldy, and Legionen Road there with the application site next to some existing properties on an open area of grass. This is the red line site plan that came with the application. So you can see the site highlighted in red next to the other properties. The house to the north there that I've highlighted in yellow is the house that's referred to within the appeal papers, which is was a house that was granted on appeal some time ago. It's just so you've got an impression of the location of that property in relation to the appeal site. Next slide, please. This is the settlement plan from the local development plan. So you can see the top left drawing there is all of the settlement boundary with the appeal site shown by the yellow arrow. And then as you zoom in on that, the black line there you can see is the edge of the settlement that kind of runs round those 4 houses. And then the appeal site where the yellow arrow is on the other side of that. Next slide, please. This is the drawing of the position of the house within the site. The red line is the site boundary, the house shown there in the black outline in the middle, access off Legionen Road at the front of the site, a number of trees surrounding the west side and south of the site, and the pink lines are effectively levels. So where the house is located is not entirely level, and as you head up the hill on the west side, it does get steeper. Next slide, please. This is the drawing of the proposed dwelling house, relatively modest, single story, couple of bedrooms, timber, simple, modern design. Next slide, please. And then this was put in just to show you the relationship of the location of the property. Probably the bottom image is the existing cottages, those 4 houses on the east side, and then you can see where the new house would be located in relation to that. And the top drawing is really just showing you some of the cut that would need to be required across some of the steeper ground on the site to accommodate a flat level for the house. Next slide, please. This is the view towards the main road off Legionen Road to the west of the application site. Set of traffic lights that you'll probably be aware of as you're on the main road to Aberfeldy. Next slide, please. And then this is looking back in the opposite direction into the settlement The dwelling houses are to the left. We'll see those in a minute. Next slide, please. So yes, as you look from the main road back towards the appeal site, towards the settlement and the cottages, the yellow arrow shows you where the site would be and where the access would come in. Next slide. And then this is looking again from the opposite direction back towards the main road, where you see the end of the existing row of cottages, the appeal site on the other side of the fence, and the trees behind. Next slide. And then this is just coming in a little bit closer. So the red line there at the front of the site is where you would come in, access the site, and the house where the arrow is. And then again, looking back towards the cottages where the access would be to the site, shown in red. Next slide, please. And then this is looking directly across the site from the road, from the access road to the back of the site, where you can see the change in levels and the trees towards the top of the site. And then this is looking from the site back to the access road, Lagionan Road. Next slide, please. And then this is, you can probably get the impression, slightly higher up the hill, towards where the trees are, looking back towards those existing cottages. Next slide, please. And then this is just towards the rear of the application site, so you can get a bit more of a feeling for the surrounding area. Still relatively open, although there is the dwelling house that was approved on appeal in the distance there. Next slide, please. There we go. So yes, the proposal is for a house located to the west of a row of houses, which are two sets of semi-detached houses in Grantley. While the houses are within the settlement boundary, the appeal site is out with the settlement. The site slopes from east, near to the houses, to the west towards the woodland. As such, the site requires some cutting to provide a level construction area for the house. The proposed house is a modest single-storey house of modern design with a mono-pitched roof finished in profile sheeting and timber walls. The access to the site can be from the east or west. There's a plantation tree belt to the west of the site, and only the closest of these would appear to be potentially impacted by the development. The reasons for refusal are, firstly, that the proposal is contrary to Policy 6 of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2019, as the site adjoins the settlement boundary, and that no justification has been provided in relation to the proposal to meet the exceptions in the policy. This policy seeks to prevent the unplanned and ad hoc expansion of those settlements which have a boundary identified in the local development plan. Secondly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 9B, brownfield, vacant and derelict land and empty buildings of MPF 4, as the proposal is on a greenfield site, but the site is not an allocated site and the development proposed is not explicitly supported by policies in the LDP. Thirdly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 17, rural homes of MPF 4, as the proposal fails to meet any of the specific circumstances listed. And fourthly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 6 of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2, and I've got Policy 6 again, forestry, woodland and trees of MPF 4, as the submission fails to consider the impact of the development in relation to trees. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the site is considered under Policy 6 settlement boundaries of the LDP, not the countryside housing policy. Comparison cannot be drawn to a site to the north granted on appeal in 2007. Although the reporter in that case considered that the site would be well contained and had a good visual relationship with the settlement, the decision on this was 17 years ago, and plans and policies have changed, and this application site is also quite different. Policy 6 requires that development should be contained within settlement boundaries, and if a development adjoins a boundary, it should A, be in accordance with Policy 8, rural business and diversification, B, be justifiable on the basis of a specific operational and locational need, and it can be demonstrated that there are no suitable sites available within the settlement boundary, C, be required to address a shortfall in housing land supply, and D, will not result in adverse effects either individually or in combination on the integrity of a European protected site. However, no such justification has been submitted. NPF 4 Policy 17 Rural Homes noted criteria which would allow for the development of houses out with settlement boundaries, but it does not comply with any of these clauses. There are no significant concerns in terms of design and layout. However, the access and cutting in to create a level surface for the house creates some concern in terms of impact on trees. The proximity of the trees to the house is of some concern, as it is likely that the closeness may result in the occupier wishing to remove trees or to avoid wind damage impact. Although at the time of the application, no tree survey was submitted with the application, this has now been submitted for the appeal. The impact of the proposed fence at the access would need to be further clarified to ensure the required visibility can be provided. Although this is not a reason for refusal, this has also been clarified by the applicant within the appeal. In terms of the applicant's case, reference is made to a nearby historic appeal decision for a house, and that this is similar and should take precedence over current policy. It is stated that the appeal noted that the site felt like part of the village. It is claimed that the site is well contained and that a modestly scaled house in this location will not have any adverse impact on the character and appearance of the area. The scale and design of the house with external timber cladding will help blend the development into the existing woodland setting and is complementary to the existing cottages, and as such it will not have an overbearing effect on them in accordance with the placemaking policy. There will be no loss of any significant mature trees, and the tree survey submitted with the appeal notes only 2 Category C trees to accommodate the development and 5 Category U trees for safety. There will be no loss of habitat, and the plans show that the visibility is acceptable. In terms of other matters, there are no objections or concerns from any third parties or consultees. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bailey Williamson, any questions?
No, I have no questions.
And Councillor Harvey?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. You mentioned there's tree surveys being undertaken presently. Have they been completed or reviewed by the council or yourself? Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. No, it doesn't appear that the Planning Service have further commented on the information that's been submitted with the appeal with regard to trees, and visibility as well was the other one.
And similarly, there's mention about the greenfield brownfield issue. Is that been settled at all?
The appellant is placing or looking for the LRB to place some weight on the historical use of the site related to the railway, the previous railway, and the contaminated land officer has noted that as well, but there's no concerns in terms of contamination. It may be that historically the site would have had development on it, and over the years would still have possibly been considered as a brownfield site. But I think now you can pretty much say that that site is naturalised, if you like, or gone back to nature and would be more greenfield.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, you've asked one of my questions, Councillor Harvey. Thank you very much. Preempted. The only other question was, I've tried to find an illustration here, but I think it might be online. Is the house when it's cut into the ground? I don't think it's going to sit much higher than the existing properties, or it's almost level with them.
We go back to the slide with the section on it, please.
I think there was another drawing in the pack online, I think, as well. But so it does. It just
so the bottom one there is
the
one that shows the relationship with the cottages.
Okay, thanks. So, members, are we happy to proceed on the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, Convener. I would ask that we defer, subject to or should say, given to allow officers time to comment on the tree report and the visibility display reports. So my recommendation is to defer.
Councillor Harvey.
I would concur with Bailey Williamson that defer, because we need to see the view of the tree report.
And I agree as well. I think in fairness to the applicant, we should defer. So Mr. Fogg, we're looking to defer for the purposes of the tree report being seen by the planning officer, and also the visibility displays being checked by our transport people. So we've not determined the application today, but I think in fairness, we should have that checked, and then back through planning officer and back to us. So members will then move on to the next item, which is number 4.3. This is the erection of a dwelling house, fence and gate, formation of driveway, parking, landscaping and associated works, land 50 metres northwest of Newlands Farm, west of Balgeddy in Kinross. Mrs. Tierney, over to you.
Thank you, convener. Again, we'll just run through the slides first of all. So the appeal site here is denoted with the yellow star, where you can see Loch Leven, obviously there, Milnathort to the west, Wester Balgeddy, and then it's just to the west of the B919 road. Next slide, please. And then just a bit closer in terms of its relationship to Wester Balgeddy, just up the B919 there. You can probably make out just on the north side of the B919 some farm buildings and a couple of houses. There is also a house next to the application site that's not so obvious here, but it will be as we move through the slides. Next slide, please. So yes, this is the site is denoted with the yellow star. Most of the development on the other side of the road in terms of a couple of dwelling houses and other buildings. Newlands Cottage, sorry, it's not particularly clear on the slide there, but it's referred to in the pack, Newlands Cottage on the north side of the road, and then Newlands Wood is the dwelling house that's just to the south of the appeal site. Next slide, please. Just some drawings from the planning application. The red line site boundary shows the outline of the site, the access into the site from the main road, some existing trees, a pond feature, and then the small house in the middle of the site. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just a slightly more zoomed in plan, so you can see that in a bit more detail. Next slide, please. This is the proposed dwelling house, very small 2-bedroom house constructed with timber. Next slide, please. And this is now some photographs of the site. So this is looking towards the north with Newlands Cottage on the other side of the road. The application site is on the left, where we see the verge and some of the trees. Next slide, please. And then this is coming further round towards the application site. Again, you can see the roadside there, the verge, some of the existing trees that exist on the site. Next slide, please. And again, coming further round, again, you can see the type of trees we have on the site. Next slide, please. This is now looking in the opposite direction, back towards Wester Balgeddy. Newlands Wood is the dwelling house that you can see in behind the trees there, which is on the same side of the road. And then this is the application site here with the access shown with the yellow line. And then again, as you look on this side of the road, you can see where the access would come into the site. But again, you can see the coverage that we have in terms of trees within the application site. Next slide, please. And then again, this is from within the site, looking back towards the main road. So Newlands Cottage there on the other side of the road. Next slide, please. And then on the same side of the road as you look towards Wester Balgeddy with Newlands Wood, the dwelling house there next to the application site. Next slide, please. And this is just looking towards the fields at the back of the application site. Well, certainly the day I was there was quite a lot of water. There's a small water course at the back, a bit boggy in places. Next slide, please. There we go. So yes, this proposal's for a small single-storey timber house with an existing wooded area. There's no historical permission for a house on the site, only the house at Newlands Wood to the south, which has now been built. The site lies out with any settlement boundary within the countryside area. A new access is to be taken off the B919 with required visibility, and the proposal shows that a foul treatment system already exists on the site. The reasons for refusal were as follows. Firstly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 17, Rural Homes of MPF4, as the proposal fails to meet any of the specific circumstances listed. The proposal is contrary to Policy 19 of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2 and the associated Housing in the Countryside Supplementary Guidance, as it does not meet any of the criteria within the categories 1. Building groups, 2. Infill sites, 3. New houses in the open countryside, 4. Renovation or replacement of houses, 5. Conversion or replacement of redundant non-domestic buildings, and 6. Development on rural brownfield land. 3. The proposal is contrary to placemaking policies 1A and 1B of the Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2 and the associated supplementary placemaking guidance and Policy 14 Design Quality in Place of MPF 4, which seeks to ensure that development contributes positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment. The site is within a woodland where the development may result in tree and landscaping loss, which would impact the wider landscape character of the area. 4. The proposal is contrary to Policy 40, Forestry, Woodland and Trees of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2 and Policy 6, Forestry, Woodland and Trees of MPF 4, as the submission fails to consider the impact of the development in relation to trees. 5. The proposals are contrary to Policy 3 of MPF 4 and Policy 41, Biodiversity of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2, as no ecological impact assessment has been provided to assess the impact on biodiversity of the development and to demonstrate enhancement or mitigation measures. And finally, the proposal is contrary to Policy 46A and 46B, Loch Leven catchment area of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2. The site lies within the Loch Leven catchment area where phosphorus mitigation is required to protect the Loch Leven SPA and Ramsar site. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, in terms of the rural housing policies in MPF 4 and the LDP 2, the site does not meet any policy criteria in that it is not a brownfield site, nor is there a case for it in association with a viable rural business. It is not considered to fit into the pattern of houses in the area, and it does not fit into the building group category. Although there is a group of buildings to the northeast across the road and there is a house to the southeast, the site does not naturally form part of the group and would not create an acceptable extension to it. In terms of overall layout, the proposal, including the access and visibility displays, would detract from the existing wooded area. It does not demonstrate a design approach that integrates or enhances the setting and surrounding environment. No information has been submitted to demonstrate how the proposal complies with Policy 39 landscape of the LDP, given the location of the site within the Loch Leven and Lomond Hills local landscape area. It is considered that the proposed siting within the woodland is inappropriate and would detract from the surrounding landscape. The development would cause an unnecessary and inappropriate intrusion into an existing woodland and would be detrimental to amenity. The required visibility display has not been shown on the plan, so the potential impact on trees is not known. The site lies within the Loch Leven catchment area and no details of phosphorus mitigation have been provided. No tree survey has been provided to demonstrate any impact on trees or what compensation may be provided, and no information on biodiversity has been provided to demonstrate any wildlife is not adversely affected, and there is no biodiversity net gain provided for. The applicant's case is that the proposed house will fit into a clearing in the wood and none of the trees are mature. The size and construction of the house means it will fit into the surroundings. There are other houses in this location, so the house will add to the group. The house will be made locally from timber, reducing its carbon footprint and providing local employment. It will also be energy efficient. It's close to nearby settlements and their services and facilities. and it is located on the site of the area where 2 huts were previously located for berry pickers on the neighbouring farm. The house will be occupied by the landowner's daughter, who now works on the farm, and that she must be on hand to look after livestock and do daily tasks as her father is getting older and stepping back from some duties. There's no other suitable accommodation in the area, and if she's able to live and work on the farm, this is a more sustainable option than travelling there. And finally, other matters. There's no objections from consultees or third parties. Portmoak Community Council support the application, given the history of there being 2 living huts on the site. There would be minimal impact on existing tree cover, and the house would be small and affordable.
Thank you. So, Councillor Harvey, any questions?
Yeah, excuse me, just one. You mentioned, and I noticed about the clients noted there was 2 huts for berry pickers and previous lapse development for the site. Have you any comment on that at all?
I've got nothing to say that that's not the case, Councillor. There may well have been a couple of huts there that were provided for farm workers. Whether those had any formal permissions in place or not, I'm afraid I can't tell you. In any case, if they possibly did, it would have been likely that they would have been restricted in some way, either in terms of the occupants or the length of time during a year that they could be occupied.
Okay, thanks. I thought so. Okay, that's fine.
Bailey Williamson.
No questions.
I just have a quick question. Could we just clarify the concept of a group a little bit more? Because obviously this was a point raised by the applicant. Could you just explain it? Because there seems to be something of a group there. Could you just clarify a little bit wider how that works?
Yes, Councillor. The building group policy that the LDP allows for is for houses can be added to existing groups of at least 3 houses. Even if there are 3 houses there then is an assessment as to whether the site that's been applied for is an appropriate addition to that in terms of amenity, character of the area and so on, or any other impacts in terms of trees or technical or environmental considerations. So the view of the planning service is that whilst there may be a group there, that the site is not appropriate in terms of an addition to that group.
Thank you for that. So members, can we now proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Harvey?
No more information required.
And Bailey Williamson?
No more information
I'm
required.
happy to go ahead. So Councillor Harvey, if you could start us off, please.
Thank you. I think based upon the fact that the proposals have been no forestry, tree, biodiversity plan or details regarding the phosphorus mitigation as regards this development, notwithstanding all the other issues that have been brought up, I would vote to uphold the refusal of this application.
Thank you for that. I think to some extent I agree with you. There's no phosphorus mitigation report. There's no ecological impact assessment. We have no tree survey. It's very difficult to assess on that basis. As we've heard, it really is stretching things to tiers as a group. There is a comment in here that the application was designed for the daughter of the farmer to come and live in. There may be, of course, some form of economic need there, which could be assessed. But again, there's no paperwork to support that. So again, like yourself, I too have to refuse the appeal. Bailey Williamson.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. I think you probably said much of what I was going to say anyway, but I would refuse the application on the basis of the points you've just made.
Thank you, members. So, Mr. Fogg, another unanimous decision. Okay. And we'll move on then to item 4.4, which is an erection of a dwelling house land 35 metres east of Gateside Cottage for Teviot in Perth. Mrs. Tierney, if you could lead us on that one.
Thank you, convener. So this is the appeal site here, highlighted where the yellow star is. You can see for Teviot there to the east and some other houses and development around the application site. Next slide, please. This is the red line site plan from the planning application. The blue is other land in the ownership of the applicant. You can see the red line around the application site, and evident on the plan is obviously the dwelling house in the ownership of the applicant immediately next to the site, another house on the same side of the road, and a number of houses and other development on the opposite side of the road. Next slide, please. This is a more detailed drawing of the proposed house within the boundaries of the site, so closer to the front of the site, next to the road. And then these are just some elevations of the proposed dwelling house, single story, a more traditional style of dwelling house proposed. Next slide, please. These are some images from the appellant's papers, which you've seen in the papers anyway. There's a number of these within the appeal papers, but I picked these ones just so you can see some of that information. So this is as you look at the application site in a southerly direction, you can see on the top slide there, the appeal site with no house, and then on the bottom image there, the same area with the house inserted into it, with the houses across the road and the houses next door, the existing dwelling, and then the larger new dwelling on the other side again. New slide, please. This is also some information from the appellant's information. Again, the application site shown in red there, and the green areas are just highlighting where other houses have been granted permission in this area in the last 5 years. Next slide, please. This is an aerial image just to give you another impression of the application site in red there around the paddock area and the existing development on either side of the road. Next slide, please. This is the proposed house is the one on the top left. And as you'll have seen in the papers, some of the design rationale for that comes from nearby cottages and so on, single story, white harling, slate roofs, and porches, for example. Next slide, please. So these are images from the photos of the site itself. So this is looking towards the west, towards the application site. Gateside Cottage, which is the neighbouring house, is just in the distance there. Next slide, please. And again here, Gateside Cottage, and the application site is just in front of that as we head closer towards Gateside Cottage. Next slide, please. And again, Gateside Cottage there with the appeal site just immediately in front of it. Next slide, please. And again, this is from directly across the road with the existing cottage at the side of the road. The application site would be in behind the hedge there on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. And then on the other side of Gateside Cottage, this is a new house to the southwest. You can see quite a significant two-storey dwelling house there. Next slide, please. This is then as you are approximately where that house has been built on the other side of the road, looking back towards Fort Teviot, with Gateside Cottage there behind the hedge, and then the appeal site behind that. Next slide, please. This is the access into the proposed dwelling house from the main road, and Gateside Cottage there on the right, and the appeal site on the left behind that hedging. Next slide, please. And then this is as you are in the appeal site, looking up along either side of the application site, basically with the trees and the hedging either side, looking towards the other land in their ownership. And this is looking towards Gateside Cottage again with the new house to the southwest over the back there. This is from within the application site. Next slide, please. And then this is looking towards the road now, with some of the boundary hedging that you can see. And then this is just a closer look towards the road, other properties on the other side of the road, and some of the existing boundary landscaping. Again, a bit more closer to the road with the hedging there and other properties on the other side of the road. So yes, this is a proposal for a dwelling house on land 35 metres to the east of Gateside Cottage, which is 3 kilometres to the northeast of Dunning and to the southwest of Forteviot. There's a cluster of buildings to the north and west of the site across the B934 public road. A planning application for the development of a single house was refused on this site in June 2023, and an appeal was dismissed by the local review body in December last year. The previous application sought to replicate the design of a large property to the southwest of Gateside Cottage that had been granted on appeal to the LRB on the 25th of November 2020. The proposed site has been reduced in size to a depth of 65 metres when measured from the public road along the eastern boundary. This is 20 metres less than the previous refusal. Existing sheds would be demolished. The site is laid to grass and has a hedge along its roadside boundary and along the southeastern boundary. There's no obvious boundary between the southeastern end of the site and the remainder of the applicant's land ownership, and access is from an existing field access. The site is within the Ochil Hills Special Landscape Area and is identified as Class 2 prime agricultural land. The previous proposal was for a large 2-storey house, whereas the new design is much smaller, a single-storey house finished with wet dash harling and a slate roof. The house sits parallel to the road in the northeastern corner of the site, around 30 metres from the neighbouring house, Gateside Cottage, to the southwest. The reasons for refusal. These are largely the same as for the, they're exactly the same as for the previously refused application and appeal. Firstly, that the proposal is contrary to Policy 17 Rural Homes of MPF 4, as it fails to meet any of the criteria within Policy 17A and is not suitably scaled, sited or designed to be in keeping with the character of the area. 2, the proposal is contrary to Policy 19 Housing in the Countryside of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2 and the Council's Housing in the Countryside Guide, as the proposal fails to satisfactorily comply with any of the categories: 1, building groups; 2, infill sites; 3, new houses in the open countryside; 4, renovation or replacement of houses; 5, conversion or replacement of redundant non-domestic buildings; or 6, rural brownfield land. Thirdly, the proposal is contrary to Policy 1A and 1BB, placemaking of the Perth and Kinross LDP. The proposed development would not contribute positively to the built and natural environment due to the uncontained nature of the site, its exposed position, and the lack of a suitable, well-established landscape framework. Development would therefore detract from the visual amenity and landscape character of the area. The site is designated as number 4. The site is designated as prime agricultural land, Class 2. The proposal is contrary to Policy 50. Prime agricultural land of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2, which does not support development on such land out with settlement boundaries unless it is necessary to meet a specific established need. And finally, the proposal is contrary to Policy 39 landscape of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2, as it has not been demonstrated through assessment against the landscape capacity study that the site is appropriate for the development and meets the criteria in Policy 39 that seeks to maintain and enhance the landscape qualities of Perth and Kinross. So in terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the main policy which is applicable is Policy 19 of the LDP2, supplemented by the Housing in the Countryside Guide 2020 building groups. Although the proposed house is smaller and sited differently, it is considered that the house is not well integrated into the existing layout and building pattern, and it will detract from the visual amenity of the group when viewed in the wider landscape. The site does not benefit from well-established landscape features which will provide a suitable setting. While there is a hedge along the northeast boundary, this does not give a sufficient landscape framework for the development, and there's no established boundary to the southeast of the site. It is considered that the site is relatively exposed on this side of the road where there's limited development, and most of the existing development is on the north side of the road, and that as a result it fails to respect the wider landscape of the area. Some information has been submitted to explain the rationale for the siting of the house, but this is not a landscape capacity study as required by Policy 39. The applicant has also not demonstrated any specific agricultural or business need, given it is on Class 2 prime agricultural land. In terms of the applicant's case, they highlight that there's a notable change to the site and the proposed design compared to the previous application. The house would sit within 3 existing established hedges and has a setting. The land is used as a paddock. The position and design of the house has been altered to echo nearby more traditional houses, and the proposed new additional hedge to the south will improve the site and backdrop and will further improve biodiversity. In terms of other matters, there are no other objections and from third parties or any consultees.
Thank you. So we'll open up for questions. Bailey Williamson
No questions.
and Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thanks. One question, just to confirm, the reasons for refusal for this one are same or identical or very similar to the previous ones?
Yes, same but different. Every site's different, obviously. Similar in respect of the fact it's probably a building group because there's more than 3 houses, but the planning service is concerned that it's not an appropriate addition to that group. In terms of the containment of the site, the guidance, housing in the countryside guidance requires quite substantial a containment to a site and substantial kind of landscaping around the boundaries. The applicants obviously have a different view, and you can probably see in the photographs that, you know, there is containment apart from the very far end of the field. But also, you know, potentially some other information would have maybe given the planning service a bit more comfort, I suppose, in terms of the impact on the views and the landscape.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, members. So are we now in a position to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey Williamson
Yes, happy to proceed.
and Councillor Harvey.
Yep, happy to proceed.
And I'm happy to proceed, and I'll start us on this one. I remember this case coming up on the previous LRB, and I appreciate that the house has changed in its size and its location, but the situation remains the same, I'm afraid. It is not, in my mind, conducive to either policy 17 MPF4 or LDP2 policy 19. I think we're in the same situation as we were when the last application came forward. So on this occasion, reluctantly, I think again I'm going to have to refuse the appeal. On that basis, the only thing perhaps might change, I noticed a comment from the applicants, is that the land hasn't been used for farming for over 10 years. So it may well be that that particular reason for refusal, number 4, about prime agricultural land, could be dropped. But that's for my colleagues to discuss, but I'm going to hand it over to them. But my decision is to refuse the appeal on this occasion. Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, I'm happy to, or I'm not happy to refuse, but refuse the appeal on the officer's recommendation. Likewise, I agree with you about the prime agricultural land, and maybe that needs to be considered in the future.
And Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, similarly, uphold the refusal on grounds of the NFP2, LDP2, sorry.
Fine. Can I just ask you both, are you happy with the removal of the reason for refusal on prime agricultural land? Fine. So, Mr. Fogg, we've got a, sorry. Yeah, so it's a unanimous decision, but the removal of reason for refusal 4, that's the prime agricultural land. We think that's unnecessary. But of course, it remains a refusal. Okay, fine. So we'll now move on to the last of the new cases today, which is number 4.5. This is quite a bit to read. It's mixed-use development comprising alterations to church, relocation, memorial, erection of community centre with sport education facilities, offices, community cafe, formation of a replacement mugger, landscaping, parking, associated works, land 30 metres west of St Columbia's Episcopal Church, 19 Perth Road, Stanley. And one correction, I think, is now that the War Memorial is not to be moved, but it's more relations to the boundary of it. But apart from that, over to you, Mrs. Tierney.
You have to bear with me because there's quite a lot of information to go through. We'll go through the slides first anyway. So this is the location of the application appeal site to the west of the Perth Road as it runs through Stanley there. The War Memorial is annotated at the front of the site there. Immediately to the south of that is the church, and then we have the Bowling Green buildings, primary school and so on. Next slide, please. A couple of plans to start with. Application site is shown in red. So this comes through off Perth Road, as you can see there, with the War Memorial on the top side. So this is it is a vehicular access, but only for the 3 parking spaces, or 4, I should say, for a coach as well at the front of the new building. The church is retained just to the south of that access, and then you come into the main new building, which is the square, the main square that you can see within the red line there. The Bowling Green remains to the south of the site. That's the square below that, and then again to the west, you can see the multi-use games area within the red line to the west there. Next slide. And then this is just focusing in on the building part of the proposal. So again, you can see where the vehicular access comes in between the War Memorial on the top side and the church on the bottom side, up to the front of the building with the parking spaces shown, and then the building itself to the rear of the church. I'll go into more detail, obviously, about the specifics, but where the existing church hall is at the rear of the church, if that is to be removed as part of these applications and the listed building consent, that building would not be attached to the back of the church. You can see a gap between the rear of the church and where the new building would be. Next slide, please. So these are some elevational drawings to give you a bit of context. The top one there is looking into the appeal site from Perth Road. So the church there on the left-hand side, the War Memorial on the right-hand side, the access into the site, and then you can see the single-storey building at the rear there with a 2-storey element in the middle of it, which is the kind of darker colour you see there. And then the bottom image is as you look at the front of the building, closer to it. So the church is no longer in that image, but you just see the entire frontage of the building. Next slide, please. This is from the rear of the site. You would never probably see this in its entirety. This is just a close-up of the elevation of this side of the building, where you can see so you're looking towards Perth Road now from the back of the site towards the building with the church roof there just in behind. Next slide, please. And then this is really as you look at the side of the church, I suppose. So the top image is ultimately from the road to, it's called West Park. It leads to 3 dwelling houses on the north side. So this is, you can see the existing church building and then the new community building to the rear there, single-storey flat roof element as you move away from the church, and then the taller 2-storey element of the hall part of the building at the rear of the site there. And then from the other side, which the bottom image would be as you look from the Bowling Green back towards the church. Again, you can see a gap between the back of the church and the building at the rear, the single story element. And then as you come further back, you can see the taller element at the back of the building. Next slide, please. This is a bit more of a 3D artist's impression of the building, which you can obviously see the existing church on the left-hand side of the image there, and then this would be the front of the new building with a single-story element, and then the taller, the kind of gold colour, higher section in the middle. Next slide, please. And then these are some photographs now of the site. So this is looking from Perth Road across to the application site. The road there is West Park to the existing dwelling houses. And you can see the War Memorial at the front as well. Next slide, please. And then as you look more closely at the site, the existing War Memorial, which I think, as you mentioned, was originally to be removed completely as part of the original submission, but is now being retained. The church building, and you can see the existing church hall attached to the rear of the church there, and that part of the building is proposed to be removed as part of the proposals, along with a small section of the wall and railings at the front there, where you would take the new vehicular access into the site. Next slide, please. And then this is looking directly at the front of the church from Perth Road, and the section of wall and railings to be removed is the furthest right hand where the lamppost is there. That area of wall and pier and railings would be removed to create the new vehicular access. Next slide, please. And this is really looking directly at the church building. You can see the hall element, which is proposed to be removed just at the rear there. Next slide, please. And then this again is looking at the front of the church building with the hedging there, which would be the boundary between the current church and the War Memorial, where the new vehicular access would be located. Next slide, please. This is the wall and railings, just in a bit more detail, that would be removed for the vehicular access. Next slide, please. Slightly closer up picture of the War Memorial and the church. Again, you can see the church hall section at the rear, which would be demolished. Next slide, please. Just a closer up image of the memorial to give you the context. Next slide, please. And again, a closer one of the church and the hall building at the rear. And again, the church hall element that would be removed at the rear of the site. Next slide, please. This is now looking from West Park towards the church, and you can see the hall part that would be demolished just in behind that tree. So this area here is largely where the parking is on the proposed plans. Next slide, please. And then this is looking over towards the rear of the existing site where the tennis courts are, which is where the new extension, the new building would be located. Next slide, please. And then this is looking back towards Perth Road. And again, this is approximately where the parking area at the front of the new building would be. Next slide, please. And a slightly closer up image of the hall building at the rear of the church and where the parking would be. Next slide, please. And this is the boundary existing fencing that runs along the old tennis court area where the building would be located. As you can see, and behind the fence there, pretty overgrown. It's obviously the old tennis courts haven't been used for some time. Next slide, please. And then this is into the park area to the rear of the application site, looking back towards the church. So in behind the fence there that you can see, that's the tennis court area where the new building would be located. Next slide, please. And again, this is just as you look round towards the bowling green and the school. So this would be where the rear of the building would be located, and then in towards where the new pitches would be. And then again, just further round towards the school, and the pitches would be just in behind where the play park is there. Next slide, please. Just slightly closer up. This is the boundary of the existing tennis courts where the new building would be located. This image is from the bowling green on the opposite side, on the south side. Existing bowling green building there, just on the right-hand side of the image. And that's the church hall there at the back of the church that would be demolished. Next slide, please. And then a closer up image of that hall area at the back of the existing church that you can also see. Next slide, please. And then this is as you come round the back of the bowling green. You can see the church hall that would be removed, and the new building would be right along the back of where that hedge is at the back of the bowling green. Next slide, please. And then just a further image to the south where you can see the existing church, the church hall, and where the new building would be located behind a hedge. And again, you can see there's obviously some tree growth and coverage, but nothing substantial. Next slide, please. Thank you. So yes, the application site is located on the west side of Perth Road. The proposal involves the partial demolition of the St Columba's Church, namely its church hall to the rear, to accommodate the community centre. An associated listed building consent has been refused and has been appealed to the Department of Planning and Environmental Appeals, with the outcome pending. This appears to concern whether the hall element of the church buildings is actually part of the listing, or whether permission for the demolition of the hall could actually be granted. There's also another listed building consent which was refused for the removal of the part of the wall and fence to the front of the site, and this has also been appealed to the DPEA. The determining issue with this application is whether there's an overly detrimental effect of the development upon the remaining church building and the war memorial. The church dates from 1898 and comprises the rectangular plan timber church with gable fronting onto Perth Road, and the rectangular church hall to the rear dating back to 1907. While initial plans involved the removal and relocation of the war memorial at the front of the church to accommodate a car park, the plans were altered, showing the retention of the war memorial. However, some of the listed walls and fencing to the front still require to be removed to gain access. The community centre building is to sit behind and to the west of the church and war memorial, and is bound by a bowling green to the south, playing fields and children's play park to the west, and 3 dwelling houses at West Park to the north. The site of the community centre is currently occupied by 2 derelict tennis courts, which will be replaced with the Muga, which is to be located to the southwest of the community centre within the existing playing fields. The community centre building is proposed to have a square footprint with a small projection on the east elevation to accommodate the entrance area and offices, which will sit directly behind the listed church. The site of the rest of the building is an area of ground occupied by the former village tennis courts. The building has been laid out so that the largest space, the main hall, is in the middle, and the height of the building is dictated by the sporting activity which will take place within the hall, which is mainly badminton. The hall element is to be 2 stories, extending to 9 metres in height. The remainder of the building is proposed to be single-storey at 4.3 metres. The roof of both the hall and single-storey elements are to be flat. The ground floor external walls are proposed to be clad in precast concrete, with extensive glazed areas, with the upper level external wall of the hall to be clad in diamond-shaped tiled metal facade panels. The building is to be surrounded by permeable paving. The community centre is proposed to provide a single building to provide a variety of flexible and accessible spaces to support community life. The supporting statement indicates that the development will be providing a civic presence at the heart of the village that is open and welcoming. The accommodation is to meet contemporary expectation for public facilities and be capable, through the range and arrangement of spaces, of providing for all manner of community interaction and activity. This means that at any one time there can be sporting activity taking place alongside social activity. The building is to be open to all members of the community, becoming a destination for existing and new clubs, associations and groups. This includes the adjacent bowling club, football team, former tennis club and the current activities taking place in the town hall. The reasons for refusal. There's only one reason for refusal, which states that the proposed scale, mass and location of the community centre is considered to have a significant detrimental impact on the setting of the Category C listed St Columba's Episcopal Church and the Category C listed Stanley War Memorial, and will form a prominent backdrop to key views of the listed structures from the street to their detriment. The proposal is therefore contrary to MPF 4 Policy 7C, Historic Assets and Places, and Policy 28A of the Perth and Kinross LDP 2019, which seek to preserve the character, special architectural or historic interest and setting of listed buildings. In terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, the principle of such a facility is supported, including by policies governing community facilities and wealth building and 20-minute neighbourhoods. Although the land is designated as open space in the LDP, the formation of a community centre is considered to be directly linked to the use of the open space. And while the community centre building is being located on the site of the two existing tennis courts, these are replaced by the proposed Muga area to the southwest. It is the particular impact of the whole development on the original church building and the War Memorial, which is considered unacceptable in terms of Historic Environment Scotland guidance, MPF 4 and LDP policy. While retention of the War Memorial is welcomed, the amendments and additional information submitted do not adequately address the concerns raised by the proposals in relation to the adverse impact on listed buildings. The proposed community centre is in very close proximity to the church and War Memorial and would form a prominent backdrop to the key views of the listed buildings from the east. The community centre is only 3.2 metres from the rear of the church at its closest point. The hall for the community centre is proposed to extend to 9 metres in height, which is substantially higher than any building in the immediate vicinity. The church building is only 7 metres in height. The proposed hall for the community centre will therefore completely dominate the church building and the adjacent War Memorial. The church and War Memorial currently benefit of a natural backdrop containing trees and planting associated with the open space to the west. This would be entirely lost as a result of the proposal, with the 30-metre length of the eastern elevation of the community centre becoming the backdrop to the listed buildings. Given the scale of this eastern elevation and the height of the hall, the building would become the dominant feature in this view. The adverse visual impact resulting from the loss of the church hall and the scale of the new development would be significant. The applicant was advised that further consideration requires to be given to amalgamating the listed structures into the proposed development of the site, and consideration of a substantial reduction in the scale of the proposal to limit the impact on the setting of listed structures and to enable their retention. The Planning Authority acknowledges that it will be difficult to incorporate an acceptable development on this site. It is not considered that there are any reasons to refuse the proposal in terms of residential amenity, including odour, plant and equipment, opening times, deliveries, lighting, the new Muga area, overlooking, overshadowing, traffic and transport, trees, ecology and diversity or drainage. Potential antisocial behaviour is not a material consideration, and land ownership is a private civil matter. So in terms of the applicant's case, they've stated that it is considered that the local review body await the outcome of the two listed building consent appeals before determining this appeal. The applicant disagrees that the visual impact will be negative. They have produced a heritage assessment in support of the application and appeal. This recognises that the greatest degree of change is when viewing the site from Perth Road, but that despite the development being visible, its design and materials will have no meaningful effect upon the ability to understand and appreciate the existing church and war memorial. The assessment also notes that the hall is in a poor state of repair and is of limited architectural interest, and that the alterations to the pier and boundary wall and railing will not result in any harm to the significance of the setting of the war memorial. In terms of the impact of the building, this is positioned to the rear of the church and is predominantly single-storey with a central two-storey hall element. The building is of a contemporary lightweight design and the taller elements will have opaque glazing. While the surroundings will undoubtedly change as a result of the development, it will not have a substantive effect upon the ability to experience, understand or appreciate those elements of the building's setting which contribute to its significant and special interest. The removal of the hall will return the church to its original simple form and appearance. So in terms of other matters, a total of 228 representations, which includes 21 objections and 207 letters of support, have been received from the first set of drawings, with the war memorial being removed, and then once the drawings were amended showing it being retained. The comments made in the letters of objection include adverse effect on visual amenity, scale and height, inadequate design, inappropriate land use, lack or loss of car parking, light pollution, loss of open space, noise pollution, out of character with the area, over-intensive development, overlooking, road safety, traffic congestion, removal of the war memorial, impact on setting of church and war memorial, demolition of church hall not justified, contrary to the development plan, title deed and land ownership restrictions, antisocial behaviour, opening hours, lack of public consultation and impact on biodiversity. The comments made in the letters of support include that it enhances the character of the area, it supports economic development, it provides community space for the village, it improves the availability of sports facilities for clubs and community groups, it is needed for the village, it provides employment, it supports a growing population and new housing development, and addresses the lack of community provision in Stanley. The Council's Conservation Officer and Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust have both objected to the application. There are no objections from Roads, given the central and accessible location of the development.
Thank you for that. That's a long one today. Bailey Williamson, any questions?
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out in my mind about the Perth Road and the West Park, and I was wondering why they've taken access off Perth Road over West Park, and is that something that could be done? I have no idea, but looking maybe at the site plans, it might not be because of the topography.
It could possibly be done. I think West Park is possibly a private road, which would make it more problematic.
Councillor Harvey?
I don't have any sorry, I don't have any questions.
Just one from me. We mentioned earlier on that listed building consent has been refused by PKC. It's gone to appeal. I'm not sure for yourself or Mr. Fogg, what sort of timescale are we looking at for those to be determined?
I couldn't tell you. There's a target timescales for the porters to issue applications of this nature, which off the top of my head I can't remember, but they're not bound by that in any event. I think by the summer it will be through. I wouldn't want to be any more specific. Maybe Mrs. Tierney is more confident about second guessing reporters' timescales than I am.
Won't hold you to that, Mr. Fogg, don't worry. So members then, are we able to review the application based on the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to recommend that we defer this application subject to the report to determine the list of building consent applications. So I would like to recommend we defer this.
Councillor Harvey.
Yes, thanks, Convener. Yes, similarly to Bailey Williamson, I'd like to defer this, awaiting the information.
Okay, I will concur with you. I know the applicants have asked that anyway, so on this occasion we'll defer until we hear back from the DPEA. Again, a unanimous decision there, Mr. Fogg. That one, okay, so we'll just wait for that to come back to us.
Convener, we will take a note. Audrey, who's just left the room, and I, between us and Danny, just to keep an eye on the progress of those LBC appeals and take steps to bring it back as soon as we have progress in that regard.
Okay, thank you very much. Now that completes all the new applications. I'll lift that out of the way, and in comes the final two cases, which were, for the benefit of my two colleagues, these cases are both referrals on short-term lets. At the time when the paperwork came in, the non-statutory guidance that we have now in place wasn't in place then, and it was decided as a routine that all those papers would be referred back to planning for their assessment based on the non-statutory guidance, and then allow the applicant to have their chance to say based upon what was said, and then come back through development management to us. So that's what these two cases are about. The first one before us is item 5.1. This relates to the change of use of a flat to form a short-term let accommodation unit in retrospect at 4 No-Head House in Dundee Road, Perth. And Mrs. Tierney, if you could go through the case for the benefit of my two colleagues. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, convener. We'll just run through the slides again to start with. So the application appeal site here, to the east side of the River Tay, just accessed off the 85 Dundee Road. Appeal site denoted there with the yellow star, pretty much right in the middle of the aerial image there. Next slide, please. This is the red line application site boundary, which is a bit convoluted there, but includes the parking area and access off the main road and the pedestrian access into the flat, and then the flat itself. Next slide, please. And then this is a closer up image of the building itself, with the flat highlighted there with the red area around about it, and then also the access, vehicular access off the Dundee Road, and the parking area and the garden area that goes with the property. Next slide, please. This is looking at the property from the Dundee Road. As you can see, a large villa that's been converted into 5 individual apartments. This one is on the upper floor there where the yellow arrow is, and that roof area that you can see is an outdoor space that can be accessed from the flat at the upper floor there. Next slide, please. And then this is the floor plan of the property on the upper floor there. 2 bedrooms and open plan living area, and then the flat roof area there, accessed through the living area and one of the bedrooms out onto that roof terrace area. Next slide, please. Then this is looking up at the property from Riverside, and a car park at the Riverside there down below. So you can see the property, you can see the flat roof area, and where the yellow arrow is, that's the location of the property. Next slide, please. And then this is closer up image of the front of the property there with the rest of the flats, and the application site with the flat roofed area with the glass balustrade round about it. Next slide, please. The division there, there's a very faint yellow line, if you can see it, between the 2 upper floor properties. This is the appeal properties to the left hand side of that. You can see the garden areas of the ground floor flats at the front of the photo. Next slide, please. This is the access door into the property, communal access door to the upper floor. Next slide, please. Parking area for the property. That hedging there runs around an area of grass, which is the private garden area that goes along with the property. Next slide, please. So, background to the appeal site is 4 No-Head House, which is Category B listed building located on Dundee Road, Perth, within the Canoe Conservation Area. The building was converted into 5 flats in 2017. There are 3 floors within the building: lower ground, ground and first floor. 4 of the flats are 2 bedrooms and 1 is a 1 bedroom. The application site is one of the 2 bedroom units and includes a large dining, kitchen, living area. The flat is located at the first floor and shares the landing with the 1 bed flat. There's a roof terrace accessed off the living area and from one of the bedrooms. There are 10 parking spaces shared between the 5 flats. The proposal would not change the access to the property, and it has a dedicated garden area. In terms of the assessment by the Planning Service, it acknowledges that the proposed use of the property as a short-term let would not be significantly different from use solely as a flat in terms of its physical appearance. However, the concerns about the level of activity being increased by a short-term let use seems to be borne out by the letters of objection which have been received. Even without these letters, the use of shared communal areas, a communal stairwell, and inconsiderate use of the roof terrace and hot tub contributes to the disturbance and is having an adverse impact on local residential amenity. It is therefore considered that the use of the property for a short-term let is incompatible with the character of Nowhead House as a residential property. It is also considered that the proposal would only contribute to a limited extent to the tourism market in this part of Perth and Kinross, and as set out by objectors, could potentially just redistribute business that could have gone to other tourism accommodation providers, although there is no evidence to back up this view. While the loss of the residential unit would occur without detriment to local housing availability, this loss is not outweighed by any expected economic benefits. Following deferral of the case at the meeting in February, the Planning Service has further considered the appeal in terms of the now adopted non-statutory guidance, which was not in place at the time the application was determined. They've further commented that in this case it is considered the site falls within point C of consideration 1 on page 5 of the guidance. This requires an assessment as to whether, if the site is within a predominantly residential area, could there be an adverse impact on amenity for existing residents, particularly in blocks with shared and communal entry. And their position is that they would have still refused the application had the guidance been in place at the time of determination. As such, the reasons for refusal remain that 1, the proposed retrospective change of use is contrary to Policy 30 Tourism E of MPF 4, as the proposal will result in 1, an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and 2, the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And secondly, the proposal is contrary to MPF 4 Policy 14C, Design Quality and Place, and Perth and Kinross LDP 2 Policies 1A and 1B, Placemaking, and Policy 17D, Residential Areas, as the increased activity, noise and disruptive behaviour caused by users of the short-term let adversely impacts on the amenity of neighbours, and the continuation of the short-term let is not compatible with the amenity and character of the existing residential development. So in terms of the appellant's case, the property is a luxury short-term let contributing to Perth's visitor and tourism sector. The appellant represented Perth and Kinross at the council's own photo shoot for advertising premium accommodation. The works done to the property have improved it. There is a noise management plan in place which occupiers have to abide by. There is CCTV for residents to ensure their safety and well-being. There is a low level of short-term lets in Perth, which is below the national average, and the development therefore does not impact on the availability of housing or the character of the neighbourhood. The title deeds cover and allow for the communal use of the building, including that the flats may be used for STLs, and all owners have agreed to this. There is little accommodation available in Perth, particularly in the summer months. They highlight local businesses and attractions which will benefit from visitors to Perth who stay in the property. It has parking and is in a sustainable location. No further comments have been received from the applicant on the further response from the Planning Service. In terms of other matters, environmental health has no objection and the property will be subject to licensing conditions. Communities housing strategies state that the postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets for PH2 is 1.1% and below the level at which it may be considered appropriate to introduce a control area in order to help manage high concentrations of STLs where it affects the availability of residential housing or the character of a neighbourhood. And then finally, 7 objections were received which raised the following matters: impact on residential amenity from noise, particularly from the roof terrace, hot tub, parties, antisocial behaviour, coming and going of strangers in communal areas, security risk, increase in vulnerability of residents, outside key safe and litter. Safety of the hot tub in terms of weight, damage, and it was installed without discussion with residents. Intensive commercial letting is contrary to residential use. It takes business from hotels, contrary to MPF 4 Policy 30, and the loss of the apartment is not outweighed by local economic benefits. Issues with waste and recycling, car parking as guests do not park in the right place. It's badly managed and there's no thought for residents, and they query the accuracy of the supporting information submitted by the applicant. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll open up to questions. Councillor Harvey.
No additional, excuse me, no additional questions from me.
Bailey Williamson.
Yeah, it's just to clarify, this is part of a residential area, not used for commercial. It's not designated as a commercial area.
No, it's a residential area.
I have no questions either. Members, are we now able to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? It's a hard sentence to say. Councillor Harvey.
No, I don't require further information.
Bailey Williams.
No, I don't have any further.
And I don't either. Okay. So Councillor Harvey, if you could lead us on this one.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Yeah, I'd like to uphold the refusal of the application based upon the increased activity, noise and disruptive behaviour caused by guests at the amenity.
Thank you. There's quite a bit of information comes through on this paperwork. The applicant has mentioned that there's permission to title deeds for holiday letting. That may well be so, but it's not a material consideration for planning. And that's obviously subservient to a decision from us. Residential amenity is another factor in this case, as it always is in these properties. There are just 5 flats, so there's 4 obviously other people beside this one, which means residential amenity is, I think, more intense for people in such a closed situation. There have been several objections received on it, with obviously problems coming through. A material consideration on this is the appeal to another property, to the DPAA, which is a material consideration for all these now. And it makes it quite clear on several points. Now, the applicant has said that although there have been complaints registered to us, he has never received any. The appeal does say that impacts on the amenity and character are not limited to recorded instances of antisocial behaviour. But the most important point it makes is that the movement of people, guests, cars, luggage, changes the residential amenity of the property. There's a residential property, and this will become a commercial property. The intensification of that movement then adversely affects the amenity for people living there. And therefore, on that basis, I will concur with you and refuse the appeal. Bailey Williamson.
I would like to refuse the appeal on the basis of the officer's recommendations, so therefore I'll refuse the appeal on those recommendations.
Mr. Fogg, unanimous decision yet again to refuse the appeal. Okay. Thank you.
Convener, sorry again. Maybe 1B would come
Policy
from
1B,
the,
yes, I crossed it out while you were talking it. So yes, we need to delete policy 1B, Mr. Fogg, again. Okay. I recognised you back last time. Yeah, okay. So members, we now move on to the last paper this morning, which is another short term. Sorry? Yeah. You want to recess?
Oh, it's okay.
Have a quick recess for a couple of minutes. Yeah, members, we're right back again. We're on now to the last paper this morning. This is item 5.2. This is again a short-term let referral. Change of use of flat to short-term let unit 5B South Inch Court in Perth. Mr. Tierney, if you could just go through this for us for the benefit of my 2 colleagues.
Yes, thank you, Convener. So we'll just run through the slides. First of all, so you see the application there, site highlighted by the yellow star on the aerial picture there, just the residential area just to the south of South Inch. Next slide, please. And then this is the red line application appeals site boundary, which shows the flat itself, and then the external parking area to the front. Next slide, please. And then this is as you look at the development coming in off the main road. There are three blocks in that kind of courtyard, large blocks of flatted properties, and it's the ground floor one, just where the arrow is on the far side there. Next slide, please. And then just as you look directly at that block there, you can see the windows of the ground floor flat just to the right of the entrance door. Next slide, please. And then this is a close-up of the front of the property with the flat to the right-hand side of the door there with the three windows that you see. Next slide, please. And this is just an image of the front door area. You can probably just make out some key boxes down on the side of the glazed panel there. Next slide, please. And then this is round the back of the property, footpath round the back. Next slide, please. And then a floor plan with the kitchen and the lounge that face onto the front and the car park, and then the bedrooms to the rear. Next slide, please. So yes, it's an application for a change of use of a flat to short-term let accommodation, and this has been operating since July 2021. The two-bedroom flat is located on the ground floor of a four-storey block forming part of a residential development of 3 blocks of flats formed in a U-shape around a central area of parking and landscaping. The application site is in the middle block and access is via a communal entrance and stairwell. The application has 1 dedicated parking space. The site is on the south side of South Inch Terrace and overlooks the South Inch. The flatted development is accessed from the public road through a private entrance. The assessment by the Planning Service notes that the ground floor flat is in the middle block of 3 blocks of flats forming a courtyard development of 56 properties. The U-shape arrangement of the buildings provides for quiet, private, enclosed development with a central parking area. The short-term let use and movement through the turnover of guests using the communal entrance of the building and courtyard parking is having a detrimental effect on existing residents and an associated adverse impact on the safety and perceived safety of those residents, as evidenced in the matters raised in the representations. The intensification of the short-term let use would exacerbate the situation. The flatted development is private residential in nature, and the introduction of short-term let uses could erode that residential character and amenity on a cumulative basis. The short-term let use is incompatible with the current residential development, and the adverse effects on residents' safety, security and amenity has been highlighted in the letters of objection. 1 parking space is allocated to the 2-bedroom property. It would not be inconceivable for more than 1 car to be used by guests, and there are no restrictions on using other spaces in the car park, thereby reducing availability for permanent residents and adversely impacting their amenity. No supporting information has been submitted by the applicant on the management and control of bookings of the property. However, any measures put in place to manage and control bookings would not guarantee to stop or prevent antisocial or noisy behaviour occurring or from impacting adversely on the amenity of neighbouring residents. This matter could not easily be controlled by planning conditions. The contribution to the local economy from 1 property in use as a short-term let would be limited. The housing strategy team indicate that there would be no detriment to local residential housing availability in this area should the application be permitted. The proposal would result in a balanced outcome rather than a demonstrable local economic benefit outweighing the loss of residential accommodation. Following deferral of the case at the meeting in February, the Planning Service has further considered the appeal in terms of the now adopted non-statutory guidance, which was not in place at the time the application was determined. Their comment is that the recently approved non-statutory guidance on short-term lets would have been unlikely to have had a different bearing on how the application may have been considered, given the site's location out with Perth city centre in a 4-storey block of flats with a shared entry in what is a predominantly residential area, and there is a desire to discourage STLs where they may impact on areas of established residential amenity. As such, the reasons for refusal remain that 1, the proposed retrospective change of use is contrary to Policy 30 Tourism E of MPF 4, as the proposal will result in, firstly, an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And then secondly, the proposal is contrary to MPF 4 Policy 14C, Design Quality and Place, and Perth and Kinross LDP 2 Policies 1A and 1B, Placemaking, and Policy 17D, Residential Areas, as the increased activity, noise and disruptive behaviour caused by users of the short-term let adversely impacts on the amenity of neighbours, and the continuation of the short-term let is not compatible with the amenity and character of the existing residential development. In terms of the appellant's case, they have submitted a lengthy justification, including responding to the comments in the objections. The appellant uses the flat as and when required during trips to spend time with family. The short-term let started in July 2021 via a local holiday letting company. A record of the actual number of people who stayed at the flat during the year ending August 2023 has been provided. 89% of all bookings for the 12-month period were for 1 or 2 persons, 8% for 3 persons and 2% for 4 people. The use of the flat is clearly no worse than if the flat were let on a long-term basis, and the issue raised is not borne out by the facts. Furthermore, the main door can be open on a number of occasions for other flats when multiple trips are required to and from the flats to complete large deliveries. Inside and by the main door is a door stop precisely to enable the residents to do so. The secure entry door is used by the occupants of 8 flats in the block. Given that 89% of the bookings were for 1 or 2 people, it is very unlikely that the clients using the flat caused excessive buzzing of the communal entrance door. The footfall would not be significantly different from the footfall associated with the existing use as a residential flat. The flat is accessed through a communal entrance and flight of stairs, and noise from the use of the property as a short-term let is not considered to be significantly different from its use as a residential flat. The use of the parking and outdoor space would be in keeping with the existing use. The proposal would not have a significant impact on the amenity of existing residents. The proposal would retain the residential nature of the property and would not negatively affect the character and amenity of the residential area. There has been no complaint raised about rubbish left in the parking area with either the letting agent or the appellant. It is not accepted that the main door being open and shut at all hours is down to only those staying at the property, especially given the number of people who stay there. Given the number of people staying at the flat per booking, the use of the flat is clearly no worse than if the flat was let on a long-term basis. Any noise or nuisance issues could be regulated via the licensing regime. There are always a few empty car parking spaces available for visitors, and the use of 1 commercial vehicle would not fill up all the visitors' spaces available. In granting permission 23/00932/FLL, the planning officer stated that it noted that the sole letter of representation makes reference to the potential for new faces to be a regular occurrence, and that not knowing who your neighbours are will cause a degree of anxiety. Anxiety is a planning consideration to some degree, however, it is very much subject, and someone's anxiety over a certain matter may not result in the same feelings for another person. In this case, it will be fact that if the STL operates successfully in terms of a high occupancy rate, then there will be changes in users. However, there is no guarantee that the users of this STL will meet other permanent residents within shared areas or cause nuisance. The appellant has also commented further on the further response from the planning service, and this includes that there is an inconsistent approach being taken to STLs and that no notice is being taken of these being no different to normal tenancy lettings, and that periods of use tend to be 7 days or more. In terms of other matters, environmental health have no objection. Communities housing strategy state there's no issue arising from the postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets. The local housing strategy 2022 to 27 includes an action to develop planning policy through the local development plan 3, where appropriate for STL control areas. The postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets for PH2 is 1.1%, and below the level at which it may be considered appropriate to introduce a control area in order to help manage high concentrations of STLs, where it affects the availability of residential housing or the character of a neighbourhood. 6 representations were received, including 5 objections. The following planning matters were raised: adverse effect on the safety, security and amenity of residents due to different people coming and going, leaving secure entry door open, excessive buzzing of communal entrance buzzer, smoking in doorway, smell of smoke entering private flats, poor management with 6 people staying in a flat that sleeps 4 people, rubbish left in the parking area, noise from the main door being open and shut at all hours, no objection to long-term let, but object to short-term let use, changes the character of the flats and residents' security and enjoyment of their properties, sets an unwelcome precedent. The flat is the only short-term let in a development of 56 flats. Many residents have lived here since it was built in 2000, and many are elderly. The proposal lessens the feeling of community and safety and has the potential to bring noise at unsocial hours. If granted permission, it would set a precedent for more short-term lets, thus exacerbating the adverse effects. No guarantee that the property could be managed in a manner as to not interfere with the lives of residents. In use as short-term let for workmen, which resulted in noise nuisance and commercial vehicles being parked in the visitor parking area, and it's contrary to MPF Policy 30. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Bailey Williamson?
No questions.
And Councillor Harvey?
No questions from me.
And I have no questions either. So, members, are we able to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained in the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Bailey Williamson?
No more information is required.
And Councillor Harvey?
No further information.
I don't need any either. So, Bailey Williamson, if you could kick off on this one. Thank you for that. I will concur with you on this one. Once again, residential amenity is the central point. It's a residential area, and that's been made quite clear. This will be a commercial operation within that area, which I think will be detrimental to the residential amenity for everybody around. I appreciate the applicant has had many complaints, but as we've said before, that in itself is not, the impact on the amenity is not limited to recorded instances of antisocial behaviour. The core of it is obviously the movement of people, luggage, guests, cars, whatever, and the intensification of that movement adversely affects, in my opinion, the amenity of the neighbouring residents, and therefore I'm agreeing with you to refuse the appeal. Councillor Harvey?
I agree. Just the loss of amenity to residents, and I find it slightly disingenuous that it compares a long term to short term to the disruption. So therefore, I would uphold the refusal.
Thank you. And again, Mr. Fogg, a unanimous decision on that one. With that, I think we can conclude today's business. Thank you, Councillor Harvey and Bailey Williamson for your participation, particularly with the substitute for us today. I think that brings us to an end. Mr. Fogg, do you want to say anything?
The usual deletion of background policy 1B.
Yes, be off, please. Yes. Thank you, everyone. That's the end of the meeting. Thank you.